I'm endlessly fascinated and curious about the world around us, about business, about politics, about the arts, about culture, developments, social issues, and the people. Most importantly, about the people that are shaping our future. Every night, I get the opportunity to have conversations, to dive into conversations with thought leaders, with change makers, entrepreneurs, politicians, and everyday heroes who unpack the ideas and stories that I think matter to all of us. What's the future of our economy? What's the future of our country? How do we build stronger communities? What can we learn from music, theater, sports, politics, the arts? How does policy shape our real lives? What does leadership look like, real leadership in today's environment? If it's interesting and relevant and topical and we're talking about it, you'll hear about it here at 6 o'clock on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I want to have real conversations, in-depth conversations. These are ideas we're sharing. This is the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Thanks for joining me. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're going to talk today about the housing market, the condo housing market, the luxury high-end condo housing market. And the reason why is Saul Sanchez with Chestnut Park is a high-end condo realtor, and in conversations with him, he's told me that there still is life in that end user oriented high end condominium market, even though frankly, lots of people think the condo market is dead right now in the Toronto. And so I wanted to understand how these condos today, these pre-construction condos today, are marketing themselves, are selling themselves, or making them attractive to users, and how that is different than over the course of the last 5-7 years, where you had lots of pre-construction condos that people have told me were primarily bought by investors, not end users. So Saul Sanchez, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Brian.
My pleasure. So give me a sense. You've been in the business a while, specializing in pre-construction condos. Is that correct?
That is correct. Especially anything that's tailored to end users. That's something that I specialize in. So mainly condos in Yorkville and Midtown. All those developments tend to cater a lot more to end users who are especially downsizing in Toronto.
So these are end users that are downsizing from some other home. What are they looking for?
So these people are looking for a boutique building mostly. They don't want to have a ton of neighbors. They want to have great security. They want to have a great amenity package, and they want to have great service. A lot of these buildings now have the level of service that would usually you would only find in a hotel type residence. But now even individual condo buildings that are not hotel style can still have that sort of service. So the main thing is the service level and the amenity package altogether. But also when you're buying new construction, these people love the fact that they can customize their floor plan, pick out their own finishes, pick out the best exposure, all that kind of stuff. And you're not just limited to what's available on the market when it comes to the resale market.
Give us a sense of some of the projects, the products that fit that description that you're selling today.
Yeah, so there's many. I primarily focus on the ones in Yorkville, and there's lots of great product. I think it's important for people to distinguish, and I help people distinguish between what's an actual luxury product versus developer luxury. And I think there's a distinction in that because developers like to call anything luxury, but when you kind of actually go through the offering package and you realize what's actually being offered, you can quickly distinguish a quality product versus something that's more gimmicky. But some of the projects I really like are, well, the first one is the Bedford. That's one I've sold more units than any other project in, and that's because it's a quality product. It's very thoughtful in terms of the size of the layouts, the fact that it has 10-foot clear ceilings with no bulkheads, while every other developer is, they say they have 10-foot ceilings, but then they're measuring to the center of the room, and then there's bulkheads all around and all that kind of stuff. The fact that it's one of the only buildings in Yorkville that has a proper parking ramp instead of a parking elevator. All these other developments have very skinny lots and they're forced to use elevators that you might get your car stuck in or something like that. So there's a lot of different things that all the little things added up really makes it so that it's a quality offering. But it's
Whereabouts is it? Is it on Bedford?
So it's right at the corner of Davenport and Bedford. So they like calling it the quiet side of Yorkville. And it's still walking distance to Yorkville, but it's a much more residential feel. You have the tree-lined streets, it's a little bit quieter. You have lots of nice restaurants around you. So it appeals to a lot of people that want to be close to Yorkville, but don't actually want to be in it. It's a little bit too crazy for them inside of Yorkville.
So, versus one of the advantages I would have thought of a lot of the developments on the east side of Yorkville is you don't need a car. You can commute. But at Bedford and Davenport, you need a car, don't you?
You don't really need a car, honestly. Like it's like a 10-minute walk to the core of Yorkville, and you have everything that you need there in terms of shops and restaurants. If you have a car, you can obviously get around quite well from that location, and it's a little bit easier to get to the highway or get to downtown comparatively to if you live right on Yorkville Avenue or Cumberland. So it's a little bit better in that sense. But the location is great, especially not only if you want a little bit quieter of a neighborhood comparatively to the core of Yorkville, but also because of the pricing. Because the lot that the developer bought is not in the core of Yorkville, the pricing for the units themselves are substantially lower. So the average might be about, let's say, 22 to 2300 bucks a square foot, comparatively to if you go across the street into the core of Yorkville, across Avenue, you're looking at $3,000 plus. Some developments even $4,500 for a very similar offering.
And as you called it, a boutique building, how many units in the building?
So there's 63 units and it's 13 stories. And originally it used to be 94 units, but this kind of really represents the luxury market as a whole, but the demand for larger units was very strong. So they took the 94 units, started combining a bunch of units, and that's how they ended up with 63. There was much more demand than they anticipated for the larger units.
And so when you're talking about larger units, how big? Are they
Well,
two, three, four bedroom? How many square feet?
yeah, anything above 2,200 square feet, so 22 to 3,000 square feet, there was a lot of demand for that. And at the Bedford, those are all primarily southern-facing units that overlook the annex, so you have protected views over the Heritage District there.
So who's moving in there? You say they're downsizers. They're people coming from Forest Hill and Rosedale that are selling mansions and moving into this because that's at 2,200 or 2,500 square feet at $2,000. You're talking about a pretty expensive package, aren't you?
You are, yeah. I would say about 90% of the buyers, I would say, are downsizers. You do have another 10 to maybe even 20% of people who might be upsizing from another condo and going from condo to condo. But for the most part, they're downsizers. And as you mentioned, they're primarily in Midtown Toronto, Forest Hill, Rosedale. But even in the GTA, we have buyers from Vaughan, we have buyers from all sorts of cities in and around that sort of area. So these are people who, maybe their kids have moved out of the house. It's their house is a little bit too big for them, and they want to have something a little bit more central. They don't need the backyard anymore. Maybe they want to travel more. They want a easy lock it and leave type of solution, and a condo is a perfect solution for that, especially with the type of services that they're going to get in these buildings.
So the average price is what, about 5 million?
The average price at the Bedford is about four and change. So it starts at 2.5 million and it goes up to 10.5 for the penthouses.
So that's very different than sort of what the market was a couple of years ago for a mid-market building. So you're talking about 60 to 90 units. They were at 90. They're now at 60 something. You're talking about what, 13 stories? That's a lot shorter than sort of the image we have of the pre-construction condo market that existed over the course of the last couple of years. That's fascinating. What kind of amenities do they have?
So they have a gym, they have a party room, they have a private dining room, catering kitchen, they have a kids playground area, and of course they have the 24-hour executive style concierge, valet parking, on-site property management, all that kind of stuff. So it's a great amenity package for what you're getting, and the maintenance fee is not as high as people would think. It's a lot lower than many existing buildings in the area.
So are the amenity packages similar to what you'd get in some of the larger condominiums from a couple of years ago, or are they more luxurious, or how would you compare that?
I think it's quite similar in the sense of, what you get in terms of amenities in any sort of building. A lot of it has to do with how big the building is. Because if you have a high-rise building, you can just afford to put more amenities in it. The maintenance fee is going to be blended across a lot more owners, and it's not going to be a ridiculous maintenance fee to ask when you're selling a condo building. So typically that's sort of the trade-off in most buildings in general. It's like if you have a high rise, sure, you have more neighbors, it's a little bit more busy, all that kind of stuff, but you do get more amenities. In a boutique style building, you typically get a little bit less amenities or maybe just a smaller scale. Like the gym's going to be a little bit smaller, all that kind of stuff. Um, but it's going to be reflective in the maintenance fee as well. It's going to be a little bit lower of a fee, but the main thing that people want is the fact that it's less neighbors, less busy, more peace of mind type thing.
Less busy, less neighbors. And you also mentioned something about the parking. Can you explain the difference in a parking ramp versus a parking elevator? What's the difference? What's the hassle?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people don't realize what a parking elevator actually is, but it's quite literally you put your car into an elevator and so there's different types. Some of them you go into the car, into the elevator, and you are with your car as it goes down to the lower level, and then you just park it on P1, P2, P3, whatever it is. There's other ones where you put it into the elevator, you get out of the elevator, and then it gets sent away without you. It's kind of like a shuffler that it puts it in the first available spot, and that's it. But like the downside to it is that, let's say you forget something in your car. In order for you to go back to your car, usually you have to call it back and you have to call it back from like the shuffler or whatever. It gets put back into the elevator and it comes back to ground level. So it's a little bit inconvenient in that sense. But the main thing is that people are concerned about, what happens if it breaks down or there's something like I just can't retrieve my car or what happens there. There's some buildings that have two parking elevators, so like if one goes down, you always have another, so there's never an issue. But it's just the idea that people have of like, what if that kind of scares people off. So the Bedford, because of the location, it's a little bit wider of a key plate of a lot size, and they were able to put a parking ramp while every other development in Yorkville, for the most part, are very skinny development lots that they had to put an elevator in.
Now, elevators are something all of us that have been to Manhattan would be familiar with because you always have to go into an elevator. So do you think this is, something that is a trend that everyone's going to have to accept in the future, or no, there's going to be developers that still want to have ramps like the Bedford?
I think eventually, if we get to a point where just every development has it and you have no other option, I think people are going to have to learn to accept it, to be honest with you. However, currently, because there are still some developments like the Bedford that offer the parking ramp, there are people who specifically have bought in there because it is the only one in the area with it and they don't want to deal with a parking elevator. So for now, like for some people, um, I think, having the option is great. And of course, some people are going to gravitate towards the ones without a parking elevator. But, eventually, if we get to the point where every lot is a skinny lot, and we might get to that, and because, values of lands are so expensive and all that kind of stuff, and there's very little leftover land to develop on in Yorkville, for example. I think we'll get to a point where people are just going to have to learn to deal with it. And I think what developers are telling people, it's like, hey, we have valet parking anyway, so you're not dealing with the parking elevator yourself. You just give it to the valet, and they're going to do it for you anyway.
Right. Okay. And how many others like the Bedford are currently selling in the Yorkville area? There numerous or just a handful?
So there's another one called 110 Avenue that just launched along Avenue Road. That one is a similar offering, but to a lesser degree in terms of they have more, unit options because it's a newer launch. However, it's not as luxurious as a building as I would consider the Bedford to be. We have one called 138 Yorkville across the
Sorry,
street.
hold it. So 110 Avenue Road would be what avenue in Yorkville?
That is Avenue in Tranby. Tranby Road and Avenue Road,
Which is north of Yorkville.
which is west of Yorkville.
Okay. And sorry, and so you're saying that it's launching as well, and how many units and what square footage, and give me a comparison to what you told us about the Bedford.
So that one is 72 units, a little bit more units, quite similar though. I think the main difference is that the suite mix is a little bit different because the Bedford, for example, the smallest unit you can get is about 1,200 square feet, whereas at 110 Avenue, the smallest unit is, about 500 square feet or a little bit less. So they do have
Oh my
some
God,
suite
like half
units.
of that.
Yeah, so I think the trade-off is that although you do have a smaller suite mix, it's still boutique style. So if you're looking, so they have a smaller starting price. Instead of starting at 2.5 million like the Bedford, they start at about 950,000. So for anyone looking for, let's say, between 950 to 2 million, and you want to be in a boutique building, you don't want to be in a high rise, then 110 Avenue is quite literally your only choice. Because otherwise you're going to be in like the Pemberton that's 1,400 units across two towers and it's crazy busy. But every other luxury development that's boutique starts at 2.5 million. So they have a little, that's their kind of like their unique offering, I would say, is that if you're in that bracket between 950 to 2 million, that's your only option in Yorkville for boutique.
Okay, and the Pemberton, tell us about that.
The Pemberton is more so of a high-rise, busy building, but I think they have a great amenity package. And I think, well, then that's what comes with having 1,400 units across two towers. You're going to have better amenities, but it's going to be quite similar to 11 Yorkville that completed earlier this year, in terms of the style of building and what you might find in it. But I wouldn't classify it as a luxury building. I would say it's more everyday. It's a little bit nicer in terms of like the finishes that you'll see in the lobby areas and all that kind of stuff. It will appeal a little bit more to the neighborhood, but in terms of being a luxury product, a lot of people wouldn't classify it in that sense just because of the number of units, especially, but also the pricing and all that kind of stuff.
So where's the Pemberton?
The Pemberton is right across from the Four Seasons, so it's at Bay and Yorkville Avenue.
So you got two towers, 1,400 units, 700 or so units in each tower. How big are the units?
They have some small units. I believe they have some studios and they range up to like the penthouse suites or the larger suites are about 1,200 to 1,400 square feet, somewhere in that ballpark. It's not one I honestly heavily promote or anything, so I'm not exactly sure to be quite honest with you. But yeah, there's some other ones that like, so the range in Yorkville is quite dramatic because you have buildings like that that might start at, let's say, $700,000 or whatever it is. And then you have other buildings like there's another building called 138 Yorkville. It's right beside the Hazelton Hotel. The starting price there, the cheapest unit you can buy is $10.2 million dollars.
Okay, so you've got really quite a dispersion of what you've got. You got the Pemberton that starts, you say, at about 700,000, and it's got a studio and it's got 1,400 units in two different towers, versus the Bedford, which you're saying is starting in 2.5 million bucks, and it's only got 60 something units, and it's only 13 stories. So is one attracting the downsizer and the other attracting, like, who's going into the Pemberton?
The Pemberton is more so very similar to downtown product that you would find a lot of investors, buying into. So when that building completes, it's going to be one of those buildings where you see like, 60 to 100 rental listings up at the same time, and you're trying to all these tenants are competing or not even competing, I should say, but like they're negotiating down the prices quite a bit because there's so much supply in the market. So it's more so investment product, to be honest with you. And while everything else that starts at like 2 million plus attracts more so the downsizers, the people who are living in it themselves, the end users, or even the upsizers.
So I had understood projects like the Pemberton were not able to sell in today's market. Is it already, have they already achieved their 70, 80% pre-sale? And so that's why they're under construction?
Yeah, they've already hit their construction financing, but yeah, a lot of them are having trouble to sell now, especially because they launched in a very hot market. So they sold units at 2,500 bucks a square foot, which is, I always tell people like that's a crazy comparison because you're buying 2,500 bucks a square foot in the Pemberton, which is a high volume building, but you can purchase a unit at the Bedford for much less than that for what I would think a much more luxurious offering. So a lot of it has to do with timing. A lot of it has to do with, um, yeah, I guess the main thing is timing, but a lot of people have to realize that like these developers can't change the prices too much on the price list because they can't really, sell something significantly lower than what they sold all the other buyers to. However, they're able to negotiate on the back end. So although they're not publicizing, lower prices on the back end, when you actually come in and do a deal, a lot of times you can negotiate a lot more than what you might think.
So how many units would the Pemberton still have for sale? But at 1,400, if it's 10, that's still 140. If it's 20, it's 280. How many units have they got for sale still?
Yeah, I don't know. Honestly, I don't even know the number of how much they sell up for sale. They don't typically publicize that at all, but they do have quite a bit of floor plan options. I do know that for sure.
When's it going to be finished?
So that is for 2027, the spring of 2027.
And the Bedford, when's it going to be finished?
That we're looking at late 2028, early 2029. So it's actually just launching, or the construction is going to start in the next 2 weeks, actually.
It's a fascinating, description you're giving us of this market and how it's changing from all these condos that, when we haven't even talked about the condo right at One Bloor West. What's that? That's the former Maserati building that Tridell's taken over. I'd like to chat about that, which is what, close to 100 stories or something like that, isn't it? Why don't we take a break for some messages and come back and talk about some of those in just a minute with our guest. Stay with us, everybody. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're chatting about sort of the changed condominium market, particularly the pre-construction condominium market in Toronto, with Saul Sanchez of Chestnut Park Realty. He specializes in sort of high-end condos in the Yorkville area. So we're talking about the high end, but I think it's really helpful because, some people have said that the pre-construction condo in the mid-market is dead in the Toronto marketplace in the GTA. But Saul says that high end is still selling. So it's interesting to compare what is selling today versus what sold over the course of the last couple of years. The development at One Bloor West, that was the Marazzi a building that's now taken over by Tridell, went through a bankruptcy or something like this. The banks came in. That's like close to 100 stories, isn't it?
I believe it's 85 and change, something like that. I think they got approved for 90 something. I don't know if they fully took it, but it's somewhere in between like 85 and 90, yeah.
So that's got to be completely different than what we've just been chatting about. Is it the small units that were primarily investor bought, or is it end users?
So that was supposed to be for end users. It's supposed to be a very luxurious building, and but they did have a few smaller suites at the lower levels. But I think that location is a little tough because you're right at the corner of Yonge and Bloor. It's a very busy location to get in and out with parking. And in that building, you don't own the parking spots. There are some spots that are basically assigned or like valet spots only or something like that. But Young Street's a little bit chaotic, and for someone looking for a 5 to 40 million dollar condo, which is what they had on the penthouse levels, it's people want a little bit more of a quiet street, I would say, and a little bit more removed from all the craziness of Yonge and Bloor.
$5 to $40 million? Seriously?
Yeah, they had like a three-story super penthouse, or four of them actually. So each corner was a three-story penthouse that they were trying to sell, and they were about $38 million, I believe it was.
Did they sell?
They did not sell, no.
So they've still got these three-story penthouses for sale.
They do. Actually, you know what? There was one that had an assignment sale not too far back. So I believe they sold at least one. And then they said they sold something else, but like oftentimes a lot of these developments, what they do is like the developer will buy their own unit. So they're kind of like faking sales in a sense. And a lot of times that does happen with the penthouses. So like they say that they've sold one or two, but who knows if those are actual sales. But yeah.
Now, does it have a ramp or a parking elevator?
That one has a ramp. But again, there's no assigned parking spots. It's a little bit of a weird situation, and but the main thing is the location. That's it's a little bit crazy. I don't know if I would want
With
to live there.
with 80 to 90 stories, it's got to have a huge amount of units, or are they just so big that it isn't? Like, is it 500, 700? How many units is in there?
I gotta double check the unit count to be honest with you. I haven't promoted that one. I only promote buildings that I really like myself and I think are quality offerings. And if I don't believe that it is a great product, I don't really spend too much time on going all into it and finding out all the details unless I have a client for it. But I love specializing more so in the boutique buildings rather than these high rises. But yeah, this one's 85 stories.
85 stories. Any idea how many units? Because it's got to have a thousand units in it, no?
Well, because they're larger, they don't. So this one's actually 416 units.
And compare that to the Pemberton you were talking about, 416 versus 700. Is there a material difference between 416 and 700, and how long you have to wait for an elevator or I understood that sort of the rule of thumb is one elevator for every 100 units. Is that sort of the right number?
It is, but it also depends on, I think a lot of these luxury buildings, they typically do have more elevators per unit, which is good because you don't want to have an elevator wait time. But also a lot of these luxury developments, the people living there are only there for part time of the year. Like they're only there for maybe like let's say 3 to 4 months out of the year. The rest of the time they're in Florida, wherever it is. And so a lot of times you have these buildings that are at 50% occupancy for the whole year. So th those are less people using elevators and less wait time for you as a resident.
Gosh, people are spending that kind of money and only using it 50% of the time?
Yeah, I mean that's the main draw for these condos because it allows them to travel so much. You just lock it and leave. You don't have to worry about maintenance and any of that stuff. So it's quite common that these people are constantly traveling and not really in Toronto all that often.
I understand that there's a development right near the Four Seasons on Schollard that's not coming to market, actually achieving occupancy soon. What are you familiar with that product?
Yeah, 50 Schollard is 41 stories. It's 127 units, and it's on the north side of where the Four Seasons is along Bay Street there. So at Bay and Schollard. What I like to tell people about 50 Scholar, why I like it is the fact that, although it's 41 stories, there's only 127 units because the building is so skinny. And the reason why that's a benefit is because you get the benefit of having the views of a high rise. You have beautiful views, some of the best views in Yorkville. However, you don't have a ton of neighbors. It's 127, but again, maybe only 50% of those people are in the building at any given time. So it's not a high volume building, but you still have the views of a high rise. But the other aspect is because it is so skinny, a lot of the units, even the small ones who are like that are one bedrooms or whatever it is, a lot of them have views on both sides of the unit. So you have both an eastern and western exposure. They take up the full width of the building, which is quite nice.
What are the typical sizes of those units? Any idea?
Well, they range quite a bit. Like you do have some units that are, as small as 600 to 700 square feet. And then you have larger units that are, upwards of 6,000 to 8,000 square feet.
So 6,000, 8,000. Is that the whole floor?
Those would be full floor units. And yeah, they change quite a bit in terms of sizes because the building does get skinnier as you get to the top. So the larger units are somewhere actually in the middle of the building rather than the actual penthouse levels.
And what dollar per square foot was it sold at? Do you know?
Those are mostly around the $3,000 per square foot mark now. But they changed quite a bit over time. I believe they started around 22, 25, and then they got up to about 3,000 bucks plus.
And parking elevator or ramp?
That one is a ramp. However, it is valet only, so you can't park your car yourself. You have to give it to the valet, which some people don't like. So a lot of these other buildings like the Bedford, which I was mentioning earlier, it has valet parking, but it's optional. You don't have to valet your car. So some people with very expensive cars, they don't want anyone else to touch their car. If you have a crazy $1 million Ferrari or whatever it is, oftentimes you don't want to give the valet your car to risk them scratching it or whatever it is. You never know. So
So the amenity package, would that be comparable to what you've got at the Bedford or the Pemberton?
it is comparable, I would say. Yes, I would say the amenities are a little bit larger at 50 Scholar comparatively to the Bedford. You have a little bit larger of a gym. You have an indoor-outdoor pool. You have more of an outdoor lounge area that you can use. So it's a little bit larger scale because of the higher unit count.
So parking's an issue. The amenity package you're sort of suggesting is similar between a lot of these different condominiums, potentially better and more sizable the larger the building, I guess, because you can allocate the cost of that amenity package over more units, and so therefore you can justify spending more. Security, concierge, the lobby, is that similar or is that dramatically different in the different products that we've been talking about?
I would say it's different in the sense that there's more staff on hand per number of residents in a building in a luxury building. So typically, you know, you might have the same amount of staff, but like you're having the same amount of staff in a 127 unit building comparatively to a 700 to 1400 square foot, unit building. So it's similar personnel amounts, but it's more per person in the building, if that makes sense.
Right. Okay. And so compare what we've just been chatting with, if you could, to one of the more mid-market buildings. Eight Cumberland, for an example, would be considered what? Mid-market or luxury?
I would say that that is mid-market. It attracts more so investment buyers, and a lot of times you'll see, with the percentage of units being rented versus, owner occupied, it's typically, especially when it's just complete, about let's say 60 to even 70% tenants for the most part. But it being in Yorkville, it's a little bit better than what you would find in downtown, I would say. Typically, the developments in Yorkville, even if they're considered mid-tier, they do try to do a lot better of a job in terms of the finishing packages and the suites and all that kind of stuff because of the neighborhood that it's in. So I do like the fact that if you're going to buy an investment product, I do like the ones in Yorkville because you have a lot better comparables that will help you in the future to pull it up. And you're in a much better location overall.
So one of these more mid-markets, would they be taller? Would they be a lot more units, a lot smaller units? Give me a comparison if you could.
Yeah, the main thing is the height of the building. You're going to have it's usually a high rise that's 40 plus stories, whatever it is. And there's typically a lot of units, 400 plus units in a lot of these buildings. And then also the suite sizes, you're going to have, for the most part, a lot of them have studios that are under 500 square feet. And then your penthouse levels are usually slightly bigger than everything else, but not hugely different. So maybe they're about 1,200 square feet to 1,400 square feet.
And the price per square foot, is that similar between the high-end boutiques and the mid-markets, or is there a big difference between the mid-market price per square foot versus the boutiques?
Well, so it's funny because I think when they originally sold, like, so when you look at Pemberton, for example, what that sold in the heat of the market when things were going crazy, so they were selling at 2,500 bucks a square foot, and they were getting those prices a lot of times because of the heat of the market, and people were lining up for those units. So that's, although I would consider that more of an investor product, it's very similar pricing to what 50 Scholar was selling for, what the Bedford is selling for currently, and what 110 Avenue is selling for now. So the pricing is very
2,500 bucks a square foot.
yeah, and a lot of these developments are actually below that. Like the Bedford and 110 Avenue are below 2,500 bucks a square foot on average. Um, However, when these buildings get to the resale market, when they get to completion, a lot of times you're going to see the pricing drop significantly. So, 8 Cumberland is more so around that 1,300 bucks to 1,200, it's like 12 to 1,400 bucks, depending on the floor and depending on if it's in the penthouse collection and all that kind of stuff. So that in that sense, it's a huge spread between completed buildings versus like completed buildings for mid-tier product comparatively to pre-construction luxury.
So, given that price difference, why would you buy a pre-construction luxury, 2,500 bucks or just under 2,500 bucks a square foot, if you can buy a completed building today at something in the 1,000 to 1,300 bucks a square foot?
Yeah, well, I think the main thing is to compare apples to apples because, if we compare the mid-tier product at 1,000 bucks a square foot to pre-construction luxury, that's 22, it's a very different offering. But if you compare a luxury pre-construction development to an existing luxury product, the spread is not all that crazy. Like if you compare the spread between resale and pre-construction in the mid-tier market, you might get, let's say, as you just said, 1,000 bucks a square foot for resale versus, sometimes 1,800 bucks for pre-construction. So there's a big spread for that mid-tier investor product or everyday condo type of product. But in the luxury market, you know, you might find an existing building in Yorkville that is a boutique luxury building that's not too old that might be selling around 2,200 bucks a square foot today, existing product. And when you're buying pre-construction luxury, it could be around that same mark, 22 to 25. So for someone downsizing who already has a 3 to 5 year time horizon in front of them, they're looking at that and they're saying, okay, I can pay this little bit amount of more per square foot, but I get a brand new product. I get to pick my exact floor plan, exposure. I can customize the floor plan. I can pick out all my finishes. I get a brand new building and unit that no one has ever lived in. I get better amenities in all these existing buildings. So for them, it's a much more it makes a lot more sense to buy pre-construction, but especially because they are downsizing and have that time horizon in front of them.
Give me an example, if you could, of an existing building, a luxury boutique building in Yorkville where there's some resale units in it, and how would that compare to the pre-construction luxury product that you're talking about?
Yeah, so there's some existing buildings, even like, so 200 Cumberland is a great example. 200 Cumberland is at the corner of Avenue and Cumberland. It looks like a high rise from the outside, but in reality, there's two condo corporations in one tower. So the 200 Cumberland only takes up the top 15, I believe it's 15 or 20 floors of the building. So similar to 50 Scholar, you get the benefit of having the views of a high rise, but you only have about a handful of units. But those units can go like they start from about $2,000 a square foot today, and they go up to, depending on the floor plan and the exposure, they can go up to about 2,500 bucks a square foot in an existing building. And that's a building that shares the amenities, except for the gym. It shares the amenities with the condo corporation below it, which is 188 Cumberland.
Really? So you've got two condos with two different addresses, one on top of the other. What does it have? Different elevator lobbies and different elevators? And are they are they really different products?
Yeah, so they do have separate entrances, that the entrances are actually side by side, and they do have different elevators completely. But they do have a couple common floors, which are the amenity levels. So they share all the amenities except for there's a separate private gym for 200 Cumberland. There is another gym that 188 Cumberland gets to use, and 200 Cumberland also has access. So if you're in 200 Cumberland, you actually get access to two gyms. But everything else is shared, and there is valet parking for both buildings.
And in 188, is it dramatically cheaper, smaller units? Give me a sense of what the difference is between the two.
Yeah, it's cheaper, it's smaller units, and there's a lot more units. So although it takes up about half of the building, 188 Cumberland has about 200 plus units, whereas 200 Cumberland only has about 48 units, I believe it is.
Really? So it's two different buildings on top of each other. Fascinating. Is that typical, or is that very unique?
It's not super common, but I don't think it's the first of its kind. I'm trying to think of something else that I can't think of it at the top of my head, but I've seen it before. I just forget the exact building that it was, but it's not super typical. No.
And you on numerous occasions have said this is different than downtown. So how would what you're selling and what people are buying in Yorkville differ from, King West or the Harborfront area?
So I think a lot of those buildings downtown, they they're almost intentionally catered towards the investor because a lot of them have a ton more units. They have smaller units. A lot of these buildings now even have studios that are surprisingly under 300 square feet, which is insane. Um, so they just lean into that a lot more. I don't think they outright say it that they're looking for investors and all that kind of stuff, but that's sort of who they're catering to. I think they need to do a lot better job tailoring it to end users. And some developments do. There's some developments downtown that I actually quite like. Like there's one called 101 Spadina that I think they did a great job in terms of tailoring it to end users rather than just investors. And it's a beautiful building throughout. It's not your typical glass tower. But that's the main difference, I would say, in downtown versus, in Midtown Toronto.
This is a fascinating conversation as we think about the changing market. We're going to take a break for some final messages and come back with some concluding comments in just 2 minutes on the changing condo market in the Greater Toronto Area, or at least in Yorkville. Stay with us, everyone. Back in two. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We got Saul Sanchez of Chestnut Park Realty. He specializes in pre-construction condos, but he also does resale condos in the Yorkville area. Though I understand you also do work elsewhere in Toronto, primarily downtown Toronto. Saul, this has been a really interesting conversation about the changing marketplace, and so let me put forward a proposition to you that. During the heyday of the pre-construction condos, we had lots of people that were building high-rise towers with a whole bunch of units that were studios and one bedrooms and smaller units, and some people called them shoeboxes in the sky. But it was primarily targeted to investors, and the investors were buying them, and then they were hoping to flip them, and or they were going to rent them out. And I've been told that that market is collapsed today, and it's not selling. And then you've got this market that you're currently describing, which is sort of higher end, more luxury, boutique, smaller height, smaller number of units, bigger unit size, better amenity package, etc. So let me ask you a question. If I was a developer and came to you today and said, I've got a really good site and I just don't know what's the right market. Is it to build a 50, 70 story, pre-construction condo like was being built in 2019 to 2022? Or is it something like what you're talking about at the Bedford? What would your advice be? What do you think the market is looking for today?
I think there's a lot of demand for larger units. And I think it's funny because anytime I promote a luxury development on social media, whatever it is, I always get comments about like, oh, why are they building more luxury product and all this kind of stuff? And there's a couple things that people need to consider. Firstly, some of the land that these developers are buying is so expensive that the numbers don't pencil out for anything that is not luxury. Like they have to come up with an offering that is going to be 3,000 to 4,000 bucks a square foot in order to make sense of even doing anything with the land. So a lot of times they're kind of have no choice but to make something that it's more luxurious. But also there is demand for those larger suites. Like a lot of times I've noticed in a lot of clients have been saying that like there's no in the existing buildings in downtown, in Yorkville, whatever it is, there's not as many 4,000 plus square foot units that they expect. And a lot of times they're looking at the pre-construction market as a way to create the units that don't exist currently on the resale market. In the past, there wasn't as much demand in Toronto for those mega units in Toronto. And, the prime example that I mentioned to you earlier before the show is that the Shangri-La, the penthouses at the Shangri-La used to be two half-floor units that were about 6,000 to 7,000 square feet in 2012, but they couldn't sell them. There wasn't the demand for that that there is today. So they had to chop it up and they made four penthouses instead of two, and they're each about 3,500 square feet. Today, there's a lot more demand for those 4,000 to 6,000 square foot units, and they don't exist in a lot of buildings. So people are looking to the pre-construction market as a way to create them.
And clearly that's not investors, that's owner occupiers. Those are downsizers. Is that correct?
Those are owner occupied downsizers and sometimes people who are upsizing from another condo.
And what would you recommend to that developer they put in their building? Elevator, ramp, amenities, front desk? What sort of description would you provide me of the building that you'd love to sell?
Yeah, I think thoughtful amenities, if you can put like some of these lots, they don't even allow for a parking ramp. So like that's going to be dependent on the actual lot that these developers buy. But I think being very thoughtful with the amenity package and not just, I think there's some developments in Toronto where the amenities are sort of like an afterthought and it's kind of just like they squeeze in whatever they can and they'll put a tiny little gym just to say that they have a gym, but it's not really great. So I think being more intentional and more thoughtful with the amenities is going to be very important. I think people are very smart, and in terms of these buyers, and they know what they're getting. They can distinguish between a a good gym versus something that was like an afterthought. So it's like putting more time in that. I think will go a long way, and people really do care about those things. So it's being more intentional with the offering and not just trying to squeeze as much square footage, sellable square footage as possible into a tower.
Okay, so give me a sense of what you think people want. So, I've heard some people say you got to have a gym, and then I've had other people say no. If someone's a serious fitness nut, they're going to go join, a really professional gym that's a third party gym outside somewhere. I've heard people say that you got to have a swimming pool, and other people say no, they always leak and they're a big hassle, and people just sit around them and never use them. So, tell me, what amenities do you think are the ones that
Yeah.
really sell your units?
I think having a great sized gym is important, or at least a beautiful gym that has, let's say, even if it's not huge, but it has all the necessary equipment that you can actually get a good workout in. I think that's important. But making it beautiful with beautiful finishes is important to match the building that people are buying into. So gym is important. I think most buyers I've talked to don't really care about a pool. Most people don't use it and they realize that it increases the condo fee quite significantly. So most buyers I've talked to are, actually prefer not to have a pool, but if it's there and if the condo feels to still makes sense, then they're not gonna not buy because it has one. Um, and I've seen there's some buildings now that even have pickleball courts. They have very expansive outdoor terraces with barbecues, even though there's only like a handful of units in the building. Catering kitchens are very important because a lot of these people want to entertain, but maybe their unit's only 1,400 square feet or 2,000 square feet, and it doesn't really fit the size of the dining room that they really would want for the Christmas gathering or whatever it is. And then some focus a lot on health and wellness. So they'll have infrared sauna, steam rooms, meditation rooms. Like there's all this kind of stuff that they're putting into developments now. So, taking the time to consider that in terms of health and fitness and wellness is very important.
And I've heard some people say they don't want to have a kids area because they don't want to be in a building with kids. So if it's an owner occupier downsizer, do they want a kids area?
I think it's rare because most people buying into these buildings are downsizers who have grown kids and they're not really in the building, but maybe the grandkids come over sometimes and they want an option to have it there. So I don't think it's a requirement that buyers are looking for, but it's if they do have small kids or grandkids, then it's a nice to have. But I would say for the most part, you would probably get better value allocating that space to some sort of other amenity, maybe more so health and wellness.
So if people are interested in giving you a call and asking you for some advice, maybe you can act for them. Is there a website that you can direct them to?
Yeah, my personal website is just my full name.ca. So Saul, Saul, Sanchez, Sanchez.ca. Or you can find me on Instagram. I post a lot of content about these luxury developments there as well.
I've noticed that. Does the social media work? Like you posting all the time with great descriptions of these buildings. Does that work?
It works quite well. People don't realize that. People always told me in the past that these luxury buyers are not on social media. They're busy making money, but in reality, everyone's on social media. And oftentimes sometimes it's even their kids who watch my video that share it with their parent, and then that's how they come in contact with me. But the bottom line is that they definitely work.
Okay, so last question. If I came to you and asked you for three buildings you wanted to take me to, either resale or pre-construction, what would be your top three picks?
If you're looking in Yorkville, I would say my number one choice is the Bedford because I think for the offering that it is, for like the value that you're getting for the price point that it's a lot lower than other things in Yorkville, I think there's tremendous value in that development. And I think it's why, although I take people to every development in Yorkville, a lot of them end up buying at the Bedford because it's just a better offering in general. So I think that's number one. I think I would compare if someone wanted something a lot more sooner in terms of an occupancy date, I would probably take them to 50 Scholar. I really like that building, and it's going to be complete next year. So you're not waiting till 2028, 2029 like you are at the Bedford. And in terms of existing buildings, I really do like 200 Cumberland because of the views and because that it's a low volume building on your upper end of the building, and it's a great offering overall. So those are right now, those are my three. But it really depends on the person. It depends if they want to be in the core of Yorkville. It depends on what they want. So everyone is a little bit different.
And where could you negotiate the best deal, the lowest price per square foot?
The lowest price per square foot, it's tough to say, but I always tell people it's not always best to optimize for the lowest price per square foot because often it's the lowest price because of some sort of factor that you don't want. And it probably is reflective in the appreciation potential in the future. But so I don't typically optimize for that, but there's a balance. There's a balance between finding good value, but a quality offering as well.
So, Sanchez, thanks so much. This has been a really interesting conversation. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Brian.
That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you for joining. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online, even from Yorkville, at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts and videos go up on my website, briancrombie.com, on social media, on my YouTube channel, and on numerous different podcast servers as soon as the radio show gets broadcast air. Good night, everybody. So we'll really appreciate it. Thanks.